think I'll begin by announcing the committee membership. Trying to take roll. I'll start with Porter County Commission. And I should explain, these are the voting members today of PPC. And beginning with Porter County Commission, Tim Diggs. Here. Porter County Surveyor, Kevin Brightsky. Town of Long Beach, Nick Meyer. Union Township Trustee, George Popel. Town of Chesterton, either Jen Todd or Mark Waddell. Here. City of East Chicago, Mayor Copeland was going to send Marino Salerno this year. Maybe he'll be here later. City of Hammond, Tom McDermott is represented by Dean Button. Here. Town of Highland, Michael Griffin. I expect to see him in a little bit. City of Lake Station, Steve Stocko is representing Christopher Anderson. Steve here. Town of Wanata, Diane Knoll. City of Michigan City, Tom Dietry. Kim, I'm sorry. Town of Lowell, Will Carlberg. Carl D. Nope, he's not here. GTPC, David Wright represents Darrell Atkins. South Shore Community Service, Margot Savada. Valpo Beeline, Tyler Kent. Here. LaPorte Transport, Tom McLennan. Here. Michigan City Transit, Robin Barzoni Tillman. Nick B. Kelly Wegner. Here. Northwest Indiana Forum, Kate Nelson. Here. And non-voting, we have FHWA, Joyce Newland. FTA, non-voting, Chris Green. And NDOT, non-voting, Jessica Miller. Yes. Thank you. I'd also like self-introductions to begin back and start with Matt.
I'm Matt Gudelick. I'm the Senior Highway Engineer for Porter County.
Bob Thompson.
Bob Thompson with Porter County.
Patty Luther, Director of Staff. Henry King, Director of Development, City of Porter.
Jake Daniel, Public Chairman Fiber. Jenny Cobb, First Group Engineer. Ryan Robinson Engineering. Dave Schilling, Robinson Engineering. Ryan Liston, South Shore Twin Cities.
Michael Jabo, DOT.
Jeff Hewlett, Town of Sherrville. Dwayne Alvarez, Lake County Highway.
Wendy Bache, Michael Baker. Erica Diaz, City Planner, Berkeley.
Don Oldbacher, Suburban Engineering.
Eric Overton, American Structure Point.
Ismail Aladi, Services.
Bruce Fires, One Railroad. Keith Tapio, Commander Engineers.
Michael Hall with Lease Engineering.
Mark Porter, City of Hammond.
Chris Murphy, Structure Point. Mike Duffy, DLV.
Nick Keller, Town Winfield.
Jeff Backus, Backus Consulting. Dominic Bridge, Nurses Staff.
Peter Kimball, Nurses Staff.
Gabrielle Martinez, Nurses Staff.
Scott Weber, Nurses Staff.
And
Claudia Taylor, Opportunity and Coverage.
Engineers for Lake County Parks.
okay, I think I got everybody. We need everybody to speak up. Thank you for announcing yourselves. Gentlemen, would you announce yourselves? Yeah. No, we've already announced everybody else.
Alex Kudanowski, City of Crown Point.
Greg Falcowski,
Okay, thank you very much. Please speak up and also keep the minutes. Thank you for announcing your names because we know who's here. Iman.
Iman Ibrahim, Nurses Staff.
And we have Ms. Barloga passing things around, and I think I need to get back to the minutes of the January 8th meeting. Do we have any additions, corrections, comments? If not, not, do I have a motion to approve?
Motion.
Do I have a second? Thank you. Any other comments? Hearing none, so moved. Public comment on agenda items. I have nobody signed up. Did anybody want to make public comment? Did anybody want to make public comment? I see nobody, so we'll just close that part of the meeting. And we're going to get in the meat of the thing. We're going to be discussing programming. That's why most of you are here this morning, I suspect. We're going to start with the Group 2 Michigan City urbanized area. And Mitch, go ahead and carry on.
Good morning. We have a lot on the agenda today, and we want to make sure that we take our time to make sure that all of you here at the committee level and the visitors understand the process that we are going to undertake with programming our 2020-24 Transportation Improvement Program. Ahead of this, what would be helpful for all of you to understand is where we're at today. So with that said, I would bring up Charles Bradsky, who's our programming manager, to brief you about the status of our current tip.
You want me to do this one group 2, or just group 2?
Okay, good morning, everybody. Starting out with group 2, looking at this, I took a snapshot as of February 1st of what group 2, that's LaPorte County. That'll be mainly Michigan City and LaPorte UZA, or Michigan City UZA, which includes the cities of LaPorte and Michigan City, and LaPorte County. NERC received roughly just shy of $2.4 million annually for federal funds for obligating. In 2020, our obligations are $2.9 million. So that means we have a deficit of $639,000, which we're going to be addressing starting next week at our T-Rock meeting. In 2021, we have $1.96 million that we have obligated, so therefore we have some room. In 2022, we have $1.4 million, so we do have some room there also. In 2023 and 2024, we do not have any projects. This is just a snapshot of where we are. So these projects are already in our program. And as we go through the NOPA, we've taken account of these projects, and so we can back out some of that. We can back out the funds for that.
What I think would be very helpful for all of us in the room to understand is the process that we are going to engage upon regarding the programming of the project. Now, as Charles had mentioned, those are the stats with the current Michigan City Group 2 funding. And keep in mind, we do have two separate pots of money that are going on here with Group 1 and Group 2. Group 1 encompassing Lake and Porter County, Group 2 being LaPorte County, and specifically the cities of Michigan City and LaPorte being in the urbanized area of LaPorte County. So with both processes, I'm going to take a quick journey here. We do have handouts of this PowerPoint that have been made available up front. And I'm going to walk you through how we're going to proceed today and how we first got to this position. What you have to understand is that back in November, this group approved a series of funding targets that were applied to the 13 project programs. And of course, those were distributed based on the ranking of those programs. And that ranking, as you well know, we undertook over a few months here, very exhaustive and I think very rewarding process working with the stakeholders in identifying how these project types rank up compared to our underway 2050 planning process. And so it starts, of course, here with transit operating and then continues down the line with multi-use trails, transit asset management, and on and on. It then ends here as we come to the other page based on, again, the mean score of the project types where we get down to roadway improvement and new roadways. So keep in mind that hierarchy of funding targets as they were established here. And those, of course, funding targets get established based on, of course, historical precedent and obviously how much projects do cost. We want to make sure that we're being fair with each of these programs based on the type of projects that come in. Safe to say that the sidewalk project will not be nearly as costly as a new roadway, case in point. So we want to make sure that we allocated things accordingly there. So we decided on those funding targets. We also want to make sure there's a couple caveats that we understand here as we're going through the planning process. Number one, there's only $1 available in our current 5-year program that for every $10 of programs that have been proposed. Okay? So keep in mind, you don't have all the money in the world, you're far from a bottomless pit. And from the transit perspective, what we will be working on here is an additional $10 million of request cuts because of our available funds to balance the tip. So obviously on both sides of the ledger here on road and transit, there'll be some belt tightening necessary to keep us within the fiscal constraints that the program presents to us. And again, as we go through this process, we hope it becomes a lot more clear as we go through this one by one. Now, as for the logic of relocation of the funding as we go through it, again, the funding targets were just that. They're not fixed amounts, okay? So within each program, again, we have 13 programs, any remaining funding for a project type will go to the next highest scored project type if it is eligible for the funding source until the program fully uses its targeted funds. So program A, what's left over, then goes into program B. If, of course, program B has project types that are eligible for that particular fund. Let me unpack that momentarily. And again, if there is funding left in a program, then it'll go to the next highest scored program, again, if it is eligible for the funding source available. And again, this will continue until we balance the sheet at the end of all of the programs. So what you have before you is this layout. This is what we're going to be very intimate with over the next hour or so. Okay? And it applies to both Group 1 and Group 2 funding. Okay? And this is a very simplified version of it to give you an understanding of how it's going to work in the broad sense. You have 3 programs here that I have identified as examples, with trails, transit expansion, and roadway improvement. Okay? You can take a look at the very other side of it, and although this is not identified in all of your sheets, keep in mind that we have specific funds that we have targeted for those specific programs. Case in point, multi-use trails. Take a look at the very right-hand side, you'll see it says STVG. Okay? So that particular funding source has been allocated here. But then for transit expansion, we have 5307 funds. Completely different pot of money, completely different world of eligibility. I hate to say it, but I can't build trails with 5307 funding. The transit people are very happy about that. So we're not going to put whatever the balance is into that. Instead, we will put it into roadway improvement because there you go again. We can actually fund that with STVG as well as HSIP money, Highway Safety Improvement Program money. Okay? So as it plays out, what you need to take a look at here is this line. It says funded at target plus carryover. I want to make sure you're clear what that means. When it says funded, targeted plus carryover, this is adjusted from the existing tip. So these numbers are not going to be consistent. You're going to look at that line and say, that doesn't look like the targeted amount. Well, no, because what we have done is prorate that with our existing tip. So unfortunately, you're going to take a look at that across the board and say, wow, we just don't really have a lot of money in those years. And you're right, we don't. Of course, we're going to have more money in the out years, but in these next few years, from 2020 through to 2022, 23, it's going to be kind of slim pickings on many of these project types. So keep that in mind. Now, the only carryover, when it says the word carryover, The only group of funds that can be carried over are transit funds. Okay, FTA funds, not FHWA. Keep in mind, we're dealing with these two different types of federal monies. So they have different rules. So they can carry money for more than 1 year. FHWA, which is STPG, and I'm sorry the acronyms are flying here, so pardon me. But I'll just, safe to say, the highway monies, the trail monies, those monies can only be allocated and programmed and funded completely within that program year. We can't stretch it out. And that's unfortunate, because we do have some pretty big projects in this region that we can't multi-year, unless you phase it, unless there are specific phases to that project. And this is something that we hope to work with starting today and continuing forward within this new process, that we understand the limitations of our program, and that all of you as our project sponsors will understand what you can apply for reasonably within what our constraints are. So let's keep that in mind. Now, let's take a look at that. It says transfer, in this way, expert, transfer out to the next program year. As you can see, with this quick example of multi-use trails, they're coming in for $100,000 worth of construction. We have programmed that $100,000 in the year 2020 because we have that amount of money within 2020, okay? Now, the funded at target plus carryover, we have $200,000. So we actually have an extra $100,000 left over, and you can see it comes into that transfer. So now we're going to transfer that out of this program, because that is the balance of the program, and we're going to take that $100 grand where it will apply, because that is STPG monies, and we're now going to apply that to the next program. In this case, you take a look there at STPG all the way to the right, that's going to be right down here in the roadway improvement. So you can see it skips over transit, and it comes into roadway improvement. This is critical. You're going to get confused more likely, because I did as staff, but you're going to get confused more likely about why is this money jumping around? I see one here, why isn't it there? Well, is it the same type of money? And you got to keep yourself asking that question. And you can see how it works here. It's the same thing, of course, applies to transit money. Right here, that $100,000, that's another balance. That's going to be kicked down to the next eligible transit project, or the next project that is eligible for that 5307 money. Okay? This is how it's going to cascade down. I failed to use the term trickle down. Okay? Let's say it's going to cascade down throughout this program. So keep that in mind. That is very important as we work through this exercise together. And just as a matter of timeline, again, we have completed these areas in the darker gray, and we are now at a point where we're reviewing the project and programming them. And then this draft tip is going to be due to NDOT by February 15th. That's why we have a very important meeting ahead of us today. We have some air quality conformity underway that we hope to complete by March 5th on this. And then the draft is reviewed by the PPC, the final draft next month. And then we have some alterations and revisions that we can actually bring into it. So this is not the absolute final, but it's close. We want to make sure we're as close as possible with this draft report, but there will be some slight revisions if necessary. And then we kick it out for the 30-day comment period, and then we have an anticipated vote of this adopted TIP by the commission at their May meeting. That will be in conjunction with the new 2050 plan. Now for future NOFAs, we're not going to be as breakneck, give people a little time to breathe, especially staff, as we look at future project solicitations. We're hoping to kick them off maybe early as September, mid-October, September. That's our goal, and to finish it up well within a 5 to 6 month period. So we understand that this has been pretty rapid for many of you. We have fielded many, many calls on this issue, and we understand. But we hope that after today, we have a very good draft going forward of this new TIP. And so we thank you for that. What I'm going to do now is kick the presentation over to Trey. Trey is going to walk you through the Group 2 funding. We're going to start with the Group 2 funding, and then after that, we will proceed to the Group 1 funding.
Mitch, I'd like to say that on the back of this handout is the schedule.
Yes.
The staff is here.
Thank you.
Everyone doesn't mind, I'm going to do this from here so I can use my mouse.
know, as he's going through, he's gonna be kind of the man behind the computer. I'll do my best to field and facilitate questions as we go along as well.
If I could have this, Michael Griffin from the town of Highland will step in. And then Mayor Copeland's designee, introduce yourself.
Marino Solorio.
Okay. And thank you all for coming.
Okay, so this is Group 2 projects. Now, some additional distinctions for Group 2, which again is Michigan City, LaPorte, and portions of LaPorte County. In this particular part of the TIP, there's a strong interdependence between FTA and FHWA funds. The transit operators in this region rely heavily on highway funds to manage and buy new capital assets. So the 5307 funding in the transit world here principally pays for operating costs, and all capital costs are over on the highway side. So as staff, we took an initial crack at trying to solve the programming on this side. So as Mitch said, we go top to bottom. So the first program that has the highest rank is transit operating. And of course, 5307 funds from FTA are solely to be spent on FTA projects, transit projects. So what we tried to do is honor the request of funding in the year in which it was applied for. And so as you can see, we take the requested amount and put in the funded amount. And this carries down to now to Michigan City Transit, which requested $750,000. That amount is 1 point something million. There was 1 million, 1.3 million with carryover funds, leaving a balance of 323,000. This carries over into FY21, and we repeat the process because in transit the money carries over. It doesn't go down all the time. Sometimes it does. So in 2024, we actually, starting in 2023, there's a slight deficit. So the transit operators at their meeting had preliminarily agreed to a proportional cut in operating assistance. And so you can see those here in the program of not overusing any of the funding. It's important to note the revenue.
Our communities have worked together to distribute the funds that we have available within our group. And it's also, there's a large difference between the points that Michigan City can get on a project and the Port can get on a project just because of the way the scoring system is set up. So we try to work with each other to get the Port and Michigan City projects and then followed by the Port County projects, unless they're completely with the EZA. You know, reasonably equitably funded. We've worked with each other in the past to make sure that each other's projects get funded.
If a project is in the unfunded category, what are its chances of being funded partially in this year through another process?
We're taking the projects as they're applied for.
Right, so there's an unfunded column.
Yeah.
And two of the projects scored higher than some of the projects that were selected are in the unfunded column. The Truesdell Avenue and Seaboard Downhill project and Park Street in LaPorte. So those are unfunded now. Is how, if we wanted to get them partially funded, or if it's left like this, we have a chance to get the project in this year, this 21 through 24.
If you can legitimately slice the project in half and phase it in an appropriate way that FHWA would agree as independent utility to each segment for the environmental review, then we could do that. This is going to make the meeting 4 times longer because everyone's going to start negotiating their scope right here at the table.
Right,
So, but I just highlighted all the Michigan City projects, and it's $3.1 million of Michigan City projects.
right, that's what I said.
Yeah, and so that is equitably split then, or no?
No, Michigan City has 3.1 million and LaPorte City has 1.3.
Oh, I heard 3.1, I'm sorry. I apologize.
Yeah.
So if the city of Michigan City would like to free up its funding for LaPorte,
I mean, we wanna make sure that LaPorte City gets one of their larger projects funded,
okay.
Or at least a portion of it.
at least a portion of it. So either Park Street or Truesdale, we wanna make sure that one of those two projects gets at least partially funded.
And we prefer Park Street and I think, the lower priority ones for Michigan Cities that were either Woodland Ave
Or, Paz,
or Paz
Paz
Road.
Road.
So skip Paz Road.
Paz Road is less important than even that. And Barker is. Woodland Ave's a bigger priority because it's more south, and we have lots of those left. So if we took Woodland Ave, it would fully fund the property, right? So if we took funding for Woodland and not Barker, Woodland is a more important street because our north-south streets are a challenge in the eastern part of the city. North-south traffic is a very important issue in that side of the city. So we would rather fund the Woodland Ave project fully and not fund the Barker Street project, the Barker Ave project, to allow them to be able to fund one of their larger street projects. And then if we could get partial funding for the Ohio Street projects, which we have, we realize is a monster, at least it gets us partial funding, and we can do a portion of that project
They didn't submit their application with this split?
with what's left.
No, but that was something that the lessons learned.
Okay, so if we do 396 for Woodland Railroad Crossing, you said yes for Woodland? All right, so we'll do the PE in 21, 104 for the PE for Truesdale.
No, Park Street.
Park Street.
Is where we like it.
All right.
That's a fair priority.
Yes.
And then 120, so for LaPorte County, and that puts us with a $20,000 balance for 21. All right, so let's go back to the top to see how the rest of this works. So 2022 and transit's fine. Multi-use pass, there was no target. 2022 was a program year for the most part. So we were able to fund Michigan City and Michigan City for vehicle replacements. And then carrying forward, Liberty On-Road Trail, your PE request. And then Woodland Avenue is still funded, and then we have a $1,200 negative balance, but you said Woodland is not the priority?
Woodland is.
Is the priority, okay. So 2022 is done. All right, up to 23. So further funding the vehicles, or the operating assistance for transit operators. Further funding their asset management requests. All right, so there's a huge balance in air quality that's pushing forward into complete streets, where we have the remainder of, well, was the remainder of the sidewalk improvements, but you'd like a cut in that to cash flow your match?
What?
You'd like a cut in the size of the project in 2023 for sidewalks to manage your cash flow on your match?
Only if we get to use it in a different year. We'll
you're-
make it, or in another project. And sidewalks are our highest priority, so we'd rather take from the various pavement if we have to pull from a
Some-
project,
Okay.
but
I would leave that the way it is.
That's more lower than the other projects.
Let's see what this does.
Always put that.
Alright. Here we had a tiny slug for, CLC planning. No one made applications. And we end up with a balance of $686,500 for funding roadway improvements.
so is there money for construction of Park Street in 23 or 24?
If we take this down,
They reduced
your
the
various
size.
improvements, we,
But we're still getting less than half of what, our partner community here
Right,
is
yeah.
getting. So we're still taking from ourselves to,
Can you fund parks in 2020?
yeah,
Should be.
can Park be in 2024?
there's still $686,000 in this year.
Marino?
I have two comments to make, and if we're gonna be doing the same thing for group one, I mean, so I have some legitimate concerns, I feel. Number one, I thought the purpose of scoring projects was that the higher scorers, theoretically, if there's funding, get funded, right? And so, to me, I understand what they're trying to do in terms of equity, but it doesn't really sit well with me that we're pulling the project that is higher to fund a project that is lower, and then we're trying to figure out how to phase it to be able to accommodate the rule about the 1 year or whatever that is. So, and I'm not saying they can't, I mean, because I have no involvement in terms of report in Michigan City Group 2, but well, I ask these questions because if this is gonna happen for Group 1, I find it a little bit unorthodox. I don't know what to call it, but it's not sitting well with me.
Let me say this, is that you have to realize you have two LPAs that are under this group. That's it. And they're working together on making solutions that benefit both communities. Now, if that's how it turns out with Group 1, so be it. But right now, they're willing to trade some money back and forth between different programs, and that's their discretion.
So,
Now, Group 1 is gonna be a whole different dynamic. There's a lot more players involved in it, okay? Keep that in mind. But these are the two official representatives, and they're working out a deal.
yeah, that's why I'm like, you know, what you guys end up doing, I'm just kind of like prefacing to what I believe might start happening in Group 1. I'm kind of concerned.
Only if an LPA agrees. I mean, again, Michigan City had more money and they agreed to defer some to LaPorte, and that's their, that's their call.
So, but is the project that they're deferring, does that project get pulled all together and you rescore the next year? Or is it just staying in the coffer until?
Will probably be rescored.
It'll be rescored,
Because
yes.
we have to make tweaks to this process, as everyone around the table knows, this is not perfect.
Okay.
Right?
If it's not fully funded, if you can fully fund it.
Right.
Then it won't.
Right.
But they were like, going about them, we put $1 million in for LaPorte for the sidewalks, that's what they requested.
Right.
But that money can be reduced and moved down, but that score was a 61 versus, Park and Trudell was a 56, 57.
We're only comparing projects within the
Within,
program.
okay, that's another.
Within the
make sure.
program,
Okay.
Having a hard time hearing you.
Sorry, what?
We just have a hard time hearing you.
Oh, sorry, I was questioning about the scoring, like he was asking, but they went from sidewalks down to roadway improvement, so then the scores aren't related, and I was just clarifying that.
And an important clarification on scoring, well, it's a tool to help the decision makers around this table make a decision on what to program. Coupled with fiscal constraint, coupled with geographic equity, social equity, and other factors. So it is not the sole determinant.
It's a metric, not.
Otherwise, say again?
It's a metric, not the metric.
Right, exactly. Okay, so in 23, you still have $688,000 to program. So,
What was pulled from that? I'm having a hard time keeping things straight with what.
But see, I think that's the carryover from the sidewalk that you dropped down. But they're not gonna get their full million that they want up there, do they?
they might get some more in 24.
Right.
Darker than-
Okay. I don't know if they understand, I don't know if they understand.
And Parker, so we went to Parker.
$1 million.
They would take $100,000 for sidewalk.
Right.
I understand you want to have as complete as possible to bring before, the voting group. I don't wanna, if we're trying to do some consensus, as long as we have some money in every project that we want, can this be dealt with at T-Rock to iron it out and make sure that it all works?
After the tip is adopted.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which is
But
So can we just review all the funded projects versus unfunded, and I think we're okay on the, transit?
Robin and I worked it out,
Okay, so they're good, so we don't have to review that anymore, so.
So up on complete streets, you still have $375,000 unfunded.
So we.
So that would go to T-Rock.
Well, or we could, there's, in that year right now, there's $233,000 left over. And the objective to having a fully programmed tip is to demonstrate to our state partners that we can use the federal aid. They are under no obligation in some years to give us as much federal aid as they give us. So to not program it is to give a flag or an indication that we don't need the money.
Okay.
We absolutely need the money.
Right.
No,
So,
and
yeah.
we've never been in a case where we haven't needed the money. It's just a matter of how the programming targets have been set out this time. That is
So
causing the situations.
please just scroll through really slow so we see, so,
From here or all the way to the top?
just, I think the road improvement, so High Street,
So what's up?
we got road crossing. We got TE only for Barker.
So far.
We got, pavement in 23, and again, that pavement, if it makes sense to split over multiple years, we would like that. I know that complicates things now, so I don't know if that could be done, Charles, with a administrative modification at a later date, if we can kind of shush the project scopes
Right.
of the other projects. Okay, well, that's fine then. Woodland Avenue, Truesdale's unfunded, that's okay. Park Street is funded.
And silent.
Signs are funded. Hitchcock Road is unfunded, Hog Road, and the Cesar Falls.
And there's about $800,000 left over in 23.
So,
So they could do ponds and then.
We have 800,000? So
So
green
we
shows that
could-
it's left over.
Yep.
so we could fund the ponds in 23.
If you did
And
engineering.
partially fund Tuesday. Or actually, you said how much is in what is that, what?
It's 811.
Well, we'd like to get some funding for our top scoring project, which is Ohio.
Put a placeholder in there and whatever.
Yeah.
Do you intend to phase that over time?
Yeah, that's a huge project that,
Do you want the PE for it?
You gotta be careful with that because.
yeah, I have.
10 years.
Federal highway says if you approve it, we have to show it in, we need to be clear on that, that's what the choice
So we're gonna get to this in group one. For some of these projects, we're gonna put into long-range plan to show that they're funded.
But this commitment puts us on the hook for the 10 million.
Right.
And that's something for them to,
True too, but
Yeah.
at some point in the future.
absolutely.
So
But-
this defines that we're gonna do that project.
But
Yep.
if you're funding a portion of the project and the project scope gets decreased so that you're not doing the full, I don't know how many blocks of Pilot Street, a smaller amount,
Mile and a half.
okay? Then that doesn't put you necessarily on the hook
For the whole.
for the whole amount. It's for
You gotta
whatever.
talk to
the
Federal
PE
Highway on that,
It's
because
whatever the PE,
It's linked to your environmental review though, too.
okay?
So that you have to,
So
we'll have to
if it's-
determine it.
If it's ruled by the environmental review, that will be,
It makes more sense.
that's to be decided, so the scope can decrease along with the environmental review. So is there, can we put some in 21 for PE and 23 for, those are the 2 years that you have money left to program?
At 20 grand in 21.
Let me,
Charles wants it.
let me consult with my engineer real quick. I just wanna ask them a question. He's saying, please, alcohol. So what they're asking us is if you, there's a, there's senior housing.
Any other additional thoughts? We can iterate in March.
Okay, Trey, what was the bill, what was the bill in 21 again?
811,000.
In 21?
22. Oh, no, 23.
There's nothing in 20, okay. So you're looking, you're asking for fund the PE in 23?
Yeah.
Okay, so, yes, but only 400,000 for that. That project's massive, so we're trying to make it realistic. And then what's left in those 2 years, that's the result of that.
All right, so it's 411,000, and then there's enough then to do Potts Road.
Okay, well, we can put the 411 in, partial construction or no, there's nothing in 24, right?
There's nothing available, Mark.
Okay, so I guess then we could put, possible to put it.
Why can't the 411 move over to 2024?
No more
Oh, yeah,
here.
highway, yes, gotcha, thank you. Transit can use highway money to operate certain purchase things. Of course.
It's a one-way street.
One-way street.
What's your
Do you want PE for
We were just talking about that.
Truesdale?
Yeah. And then,
Yeah, PE for Truesdale in, 23.
that's what it is. And then,
I'll say too that sidewalks are still short a little bit.
okay, so
You want to?
They have 317.
so there's, so that fully funds sidewalk.
I gotta redo the math, but that was, it's about 150 flat.
150, okay. And then if we could get a little bit, like maybe PE
You want your TE for these two?
That's their money. Sorry.
That'll set you up for the next program, the next note for them pretty well.
yeah, that's nice.
Are, is it sufficient from your standpoint? Okay. All
Yeah.
right.
We're good.
Good.
If you're good.
Yep.
And we can iterate in March.
What?
There's time to iterate, but we have to submit something to end that on Friday.
Okay.
If we're ready, let's go ahead and take a vote. Do I have a motion to approve these amended changes? Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second. Any other discussion?
I just, Mr. Chairman, I just want to clarify. Our friends and neighbors in LaPorte County and LaPorte, the two LPAs, you're satisfied with this approach?
Yeah.
And I just want to make sure that we're cautious about what Dean raised. You're practitioners, so I know you're very aware of this. The commitment of PE requires the I just want to make sure there's.
Because that's UZA money,
Right.
maybe their UZA money that they have, money committed to them.
I'm doing due diligence, but I know I'm talking to experienced practitioners, so it's almost.
That's why I wanted to consult our engineer before I made that decision. So I go ahead and request that for the PE.
Thank you.
I do appreciate you reiterating liabilities, because that's what we enter into when we do these agreements.
Ohio Street looks like it's an incredibly ambitious project.
It's a big one.
It's gotta be more than just reconstruction, because that's about 10 million bucks for 1.5 miles.
Well, it's about There's also, stormwater in there, yeah.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anybody against? Thank you for working together. We're
Yes.
really impressed that you resolved your issues. Now we'll move on to group one.
That was fun. Okay. So, hopefully now we all have a somewhat better understanding of how this process works, although obviously on a micro scale regarding group two, we're now going to move into the group one funding. And like before, Charles is going to come back here and talk about our current tip in the current, our current 4-year or 5-year tip, so, and bring us up to date on the group one funding. You got the computer?
So I finished this last night about 10 o'clock, so, group two, I'm sorry I didn't get something like this for you finished.
We're fine.
Okay.
We'll talk to you.
What I did was, for this part, I put together a presentation of, actually it's a spreadsheet of what we have already got programmed in group one. So these are all the projects that are already in there that are affecting our program, our NOPA. And I tried to put them according to, these are all the projects, like I said, that we have. Air quality, complete streets, operating assistant for new transit, environmental, quality of place, and then roadway improvements.
These are projects
Currently in the tip. And actually, I should say currently in the spending plan. So for bike and pedestrian facilities, in 2020, we have $802,000. In 2021, we got $5.5 million already programmed. 984,000 in 2022, 1.8 million in 2023, and 1.4 million in 2024. So we have projects all the way out to 2024 for bike and pedestrian facilities. Air quality, 360,000, and then 600,000 in 2021. Complete streets. We have two projects, 450,000 in 2020 and $1.02 million, $1.03 million in 2021. Transit assistance for new transit service. We have roughly just under $600,000 in 2020 and then $528,000 in 2021. Environmental projects, we have $246,000. One project in Hobart, and in 2020 we have $160,000. In 2021, $2.2 million. In 2023 we got 2021 2.2. 2022, we have $717,000. That's already in the program. And then in roadway improvements, we have almost $18 million in 2020. $8 million in 2021, $25 million in 2022. We've already discussed that at the last, mentioned that we'll be discussing that at the next T-Rock meeting because there's a deficit that year. 2023, we've got $3 million, and in 2024, we have $8.2 million. That's already programmed. So at the very bottom, I've done the math. The math works out. I had a little trouble with it last night until I realized that we had set aside $375,000 every year for change orders or other risks. And that is everything that I have.
Thank you, Charles. Much like the last exercise with Group 2, we're now going to proceed with Group 1 with one major difference. There are no numbers already assigned. We will be assigning them as we go through this. Again, the two major issues to keep in mind as we program projects. Number one, fiscal constraint. If there's not enough money in the program, then it just doesn't make sense to fund the complete project. And there are many projects that, unfortunately, albeit very important for the region or for that locality, we simply cannot afford. With that said, we would go down then, and regarding the high score, and the highest scores in that program will receive that money again if the money is available. And so we keep those two in mind all the way through this, fiscal constraint and the project ranking. Again, make sure we fund as much as we can within that program. Whatever is left over falls down the tree and cascades down to the bottom, and hopefully if all works out well, we'll have a zero balance or close to a zero balance at the end. So again, I pass it to Trey to start us off.
Okay. So an important distinction on Group 1 is the transit projects are largely on their own spreadsheet. There's not as much of an interplay between FHWA funds and FTA funds except for transit expansion projects. So we're going to try to handle the highway side first and then go to the transit side. But there is interplay between both still. So, as Charles has mentioned, 2020 is fully programmed. So there are no targeted funding in the entire list. If you go all the way down to 2020, let me hide this. We have some. That's transit expansion. Planning funds for transit. But otherwise, there are no targets for funding in 2020 because it's a fully programmed year. All right. So for 2021, start off in multi-use paths. There's no funding targeted, and there's so there's nothing to do with that. In 2021, there was no target for air quality improvement projects. In 2021, there was no target for complete street projects. In 2021, there was no target for transit expansion projects. In 2021, these projects are already listed from the existing TIP. They should be here. They're in Charles's other presentation, so that deficit is not real. All right, so for planning funds, this is again on the 5307 side, but they do make requests on the highway side. Planning as well as LPAs make requests for highway planning for funding as well. All right, so there's no environmental target. So the first target we come to was quality of place at $750,000. This was kind of chiefly aimed at traffic calming projects using HTIP funds. The only project that applied for this funding was approximately for $5 million with their PE request considered. So we cannot fund that project. So that program, those funds roll to the next program.
And I'm not understanding why we wouldn't fund partially the project, get it in the TIP here.
Can you logically rescope it according to environmental rules? With only $750,000 available?
That's the problem we're running into. We start phasing out projects, first, we're gonna be here till forever. And second of all, is it even doable by FHWA environmental rules? There's logical termini issues, and again, we'll be talking when cows come home about splitting up these projects. That's a problem.
What do you mean by termini issues?
Well, we have to have logical endpoints on the project that can be measured out from the environmental process. And again, that obviously presupposes an application separately for those different phases. So just an arbitrary, okay, just give us this and that project, that just doesn't cut it for our programming purposes.
You have to phase the project logically. It can't just be arbitrarily cut from block to block. There has to be independent utility in each section. And it's a little bit simpler on a repaving job because repaving is independent utility. This is not a repaving job.
Why then is a roadway expansion project being scored as a quality of place?
Because congestion is a quality of place issue. Under the presumption that roadway expansions occurred to address congestion.
And $750,000 isn't enough for this category to take care of any.
It was targeted for traffic calming projects. It wasn't targeted for roadway expansion projects.
We submitted this as a roadway expansion project, not a quality of life project.
That's the program that project type exists under. Okay, absent of, the ability to scope that down to $750,000, we're gonna continue to move on. So pulling that money out of that program and transferring it to the next one provides for $1.975 million in the roadway improvements program. So going to the top of the list, the very first project, which would fit within that sum of money, is the Crown Point Roundabout. Then the Michigan intersection in Hammond. There be $839,000 left. We thought it might be logical to pay the PE on the 15th Ave. No, wrong. Where is it? The PE on 5th and Bigger. Cedar Lake, 133rd Avenue fits.
So, before you move on, my project, the second one, Hammond, Michigan intersection, I have read that position, there's no way I can.
Okay.
Can I ask a question, Terry? That we don't go back up to a use path? We don't.
If the money is still available, because we can't make it work, it does cycle back to the top.
Okay, sorry, we're all the way down.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, then it comes, we want to balance it out. That's how it works. Don't forget, we have no money for this program here for trails as an example, because it's already been eaten up by trails.
Yeah, the 5 point.
Existing, yeah. Kathy?
I was just gonna ask if everyone around the table could speak into the mics, if there should be mics scattered around here, if you want to speak up. It's really hard to hear, and there's also a lot of chattering, which I know it's a long meeting.
Okay, so then we have a $1.15 million available.
How much?
About 112,000. 1,112,000. So, on this list then, for paying for projects, we could potentially, I don't know if Gary could get the project ready by 2021.
Can you do it?
Yes.
Can I raise an issue for the city of Colbert?
Go ahead.
Can I raise an issue? I wanted to explain a letter of private support that came related.
Can you walk up to the microphone?
I wanted to take this chance to explain a belated letter of private support that we were able to acquire. We have been working closely with Becknell Industrial, which is the developer of Northland Crossings, which is a Class A industrial park in Colbert. And in December, we were in negotiations with them regarding a financial commitment to the local road project that was tied in part to a rezone that they had pending. And those negotiations were at a point where we didn't feel we could muddy the waters by asking for their financial participation in this. We were not really able to kind of cut through the fog until later in January in terms of that negotiation. And so we felt more comfortable going to them after that point, asking for a financial commitment toward the roundabout at Marcella and 61st. So there was a letter that was submitted to Charles and Scott that indicated under the signature of their executive vice president and chief operating officer that they would participate financially with us. And the reason this intersection, this roundabout at Marcella and 61st is so critical is currently the level of service is at D. It's at D. And we have a large company that has located there. It's under construction now in Winwright. We expect the level of service will continue to decline. But with this roundabout improvement that we tried very hard to leverage as part of this economic development incentive, and we landed that project last year, but we were unsuccessful in doing so. But we feel if this intersection is not addressed, and this was part of our discussion with Becknell, it will definitely hamper two things. It will hamper being able to get located in our community from Illinois, and it will hamper the continued development of Northland Crossings, which is, again, one of the few Class A industrial parks in Lake County. In addition, it will hamper the future development of other likely industrial parks that are to the east on 61st Avenue, such as Ameriflex Southway. So we're coming to the TPC. I realize we're asking for some grace. It's not often that the city of Colbert has asked for that grace, but because we were successful in getting a letter of private support, we're asking if you would consider the addition of the points for that private letter support. And again,
Some of the reason is because we were involved in what at the time, during the application period, was a fairly contentious negotiation that we think is now turned friendly to the point that they were willing to write this letter, and that we're hoping will be successfully concluded with them in the very near future here in the Northeast Zone.
This is in the middle of page 5 of the handout from Marcel at 61st.
So for comments,
Could we ask the staff's position on a response to that, please?
Okay. Obviously, we are beyond the time of adjusting scores based on the application deadline, based on submissions that we have asked at least 2 or 3 times over from the LPAs. And to my knowledge, Charles, you received this letter last week?
Yeah, I think that's when Dennery sent it in.
So that's how the staff, we're, as I have talked about in a couple of meetings, we're pretty letter by the law here. And so we have kind of let the groups have discretion, 3PC and other topical committees withstanding. They have passed things through. So it's really up to this committee at this point if they believe that these points should be ascribed. But the question about the letter of support, when they're saying that they're going to do a finance, are they looking to help out with the actual construction of the project? To finance the construction?
The exact dollar amount is still being negotiated as a total package of financial commitment to the roads, not just this roundabout. It would fortunate to receive any federal money, but also the construction of 69th Avenue, which is a totally local project with support from the regional development.
So, to clarify the request, they're asking for additional points because of this letter of support for the partnership. I'll have to dive in and find out exactly what number that is. It could be 3 to 5 points. 5 points additional? Okay. So they would be getting an additional 5 points, again, if this group agrees that letter and that commitment is doable in this case based on that commitment from the company. However, we're not talking about reducing the project at all. That number still remains at 2.9 million. So let's just keep that in mind. That is the request of Hobart. And Chairman, I leave it to you for dialogue with the committee members.
You know, that moving on 2 places. Currently, their score is 63, and just moving ahead for project in Maryville at 79 in Mississippi, and Gary at 15. Let this membership take over.
My question is, when was the date the letter was submitted? Didn't STC meet last Tuesday?
I believe this was after the STC meeting? Yes. Scott is confirming yes. It was after the Surface Transportation Committee.
And that's why we were directed to staff to come here, because we were not able to have it in time for discussion with the STC.
I have 2 questions. First one is, when are you looking to do the project? And what year? Okay. And second question is to staff, is that even if they were to get those points, we know for 2021 there's not enough money for it. There's a deficit on the next year.
Right.
So you said 2023?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
I had attended a number of the topical committees, and my recollection, and other members might help me if I'm accurate, but this issue came up where we were given a deadline to make submittals for the project. I think in one particular case, they came in after the submittals were requested by staff and they were denied. And so it would be unusual to allow the Hobart request at this time based upon a previous decision made by another topical.
Any other comments?
Vote as if it's missed the deadline, but going forward, those projects that have significance with regards to the, as a whole, I think we need to, we have the nice strategic plan for the 7th floor economic development.
So to support Colbert's request,
I'll make a motion to support it.
is there a second? I think you all tried hard, but for lack of a second, you don't have a motion.
May I want to inquire, in that case of, with the lead, Mr. Chair, did they previously, when the TPC dealt, the TPC stickers, excuse me, the top of the stitches up, was there an actual number in these letters of commitment that came across or not?
So these are partnership, this was a category for plans, and they were partnerships. In some cases, there were economic incentive or commitments from the sponsor, the partner. In some cases, there were not. So there were sometimes there was funding from the participant, and sometimes there were not. For example, we have a project that's a business association that will help with planning for the project, but they're not committing any funding. And we receive points for it.
You're saying in-kind participation?
Correct.
All right. I just want to share my thinking with my colleagues. I could have seconded it and allowed it to go to a vote, whether I felt strongly about it or not. But I'm sympathetic to that. I already believe it's regional. The number's a number. It's a metric. It's not B metric for me. Whether we give you the extra 5 points, so my issue is, part of this is about fiscal constraint. And because we already know we have a deficit in 2022, I would feel better about a grace if there was a number identified, because that way I could make a more informed judgment about how to allocate, how much of that 2 million, 2.9 million we need. That would make me feel more inclined, because I have more information then, because so many people are competing for those dollars. That's my only issue. I commend that you did it. I see its regionalism. There's no question in my mind. And I understood that Class A industrial parks are rare. So it's not about that. And I think you're doing a remarkable job over there. But without a number, I don't feel, we don't know how to, I don't know how to assess assess how much of that you really need in light of all the other competing good projects as well. And at some point, I do have to defer to, the 5 brings you up a little bit, but I would have felt better about knowing that number for me. Because I think that would be helpful, because the constraint, I probably, what is it that Abraham Maslow said, when your only tool is a hammer, you tend to see every problem as a nail. I'm a fiscal officer, so fiscal constraint is sort of where I lean. So if I could identify how much of the share that pledge is through an exaction, then, and that's what the term of art is, I'm just showing off the
But we don't want to use the term
exaction. That's the finance mechanism when it's done in light of the planning commission. If I knew that, I'd be more inclined to say, at least I have more information, so that when we're getting down to the finals, we'd be in a position to say, well, that commitment to you, because it lowered how much you needed, wouldn't involve taking away from some other competing project. It's an unknown, but I commend you for getting it. But that's why I didn't decide to weigh in, because by not weighing in, I guess I have.
Well, and the difficulty in responding is that we are still negotiating
I
on the
understand.
final amount for 69. So it's a bit of a forced trade internally with the company as to, X amount for 69 less Y amount for Marcelo Roundabout, which is why we're not able to identify a number, because we haven't.
I understand.
We all understand.
Other than they've indicated that they will financially support.
We're sympathetic, and really, I agree with Michael. I want to know the bottom line and see if we're going to really lose something, because a number, we just don't know what their commitment is and what the rest of you are going to be giving up in the first place. So, in the name of fairness, let's just move on. Next.
Okay, we still have $810,000 to program in 2021. So, going back to the top of this program, Hammond has already said that they cannot use the $276,000 in that year. And then the next funding project that would fit would be Cedar Lake.
I had a quick question about that. We submitted that as an HSIP fund based on our scoping meetings. We actually requested 90-10. And that number doesn't reflect that. Is that something you program now, or?
Yeah, I did on the semester.
Okay. That's one of those areas of improvement we need to achieve next year. Is the applications need to be better.
So where are we at now?
$246,000. So if we keep it in this program, we could potentially do some PE requests. But they're all fairly low scoring projects.
So, just a quick question, Trey, we didn't fund the Crown Point roundabout because you knew it was in later.
I thought we did.
Didn't fund it? Yeah. Okay, it's, oh, there it is.
Yeah.
Okay. And Hammond can't use theirs.
So theoretically then this money, if we can't, and this is up to the membership, but what to do. But theoretically, if it can't be used in the program, then it'll leave and then it'll cycle back to the top.
It'll go to the following year, that's what you mean?
No. You can't, it's highway money.
Yeah, it just stays within that year, right?
The committee needs to keep in mind that there is volatility in project costs. While the Rock has set aside a certain amount of money for possible change orders, we don't know what could happen. So
we've got to allow for that.
yeah, that's been, well, no, not in this.
On this one.
Charles said this was
Where's the
not including
375
change
at?
orders in your snapshot.
Where's the 375 at?
Right.
It's not letting me turn. We have, Mr. Chairman, we have more questions in the audience if you want.
Yes.
Sure. Can we clarify if, our roundabout project that was selected was, HSIP or 90-10 or 80-20? And if it isn't 90-10, does it qualify for that?
You guys hear his question?
We could put it in as such for now. Yeah. Because it is the intersection safety improvements. And then pending eligibility, we can adjust if you're still interested in 80-20.
Yeah. That's, there's money on the table.
Mr. Chairman, colleagues, it sounds to me like that if there's no strong or compelling reason for the others, then the balance then is used for change order.
Change orders are already, they're not listed here, but they're already deducted from the available funds.
Okay, so you've accounted for that? Oh,
Yep.
Well, we've set aside a programmed amount. There's no reason why that programmed amount can't vary. And that's kind of where we're going to. The additional could be used to fund possible change orders at this stage.
Yes,
We're trying to find a way out now.
So with that adjustment, that brings it to a $93,000 balance, which is pretty good for government math. Does everyone agree?
So, does everybody agree with what David just suggested.
And that would be 93,000?
Yeah, just increases the surplus available to the
So we still have money available.
Can you scroll back up to
Without losing.
All the way to the top.
No, just this.
That's the whole
category.
board.
You see where you funded again?
I thought it was
Is anything on the
zero.
table?
We could potentially, if we think this project would score well, then the PE request on Valparaiso was 96,000. Which would give us a slight deficit, which is,
It's the Glendale Roosevelt Road.
yeah,
So,
if we want to hitch our wagon to that in a future year.
But, yeah, when we use just the next year is for a $7 million deficit.
Yes, Catherine?
Oh, I just wanted to remind the committee what that set aside is. I think Charles related it to you.
Yes, of the available funding, 7.5% was set aside for PE and right-of-way. That was up to whether or not the applicant wanted to apply for that funding. If they did, it's noted here. If they did not, that funding was recycled back into the overall funding amount, and they were awarded extra points for bringing in their own resources to advance the project.
So is that Valpo's wish to move that money to that?
Yeah, we'll put a placeholder to see if we can highlight it, if we can afford to pay for it later.
Danny?
The construction aspect of it.
Mr. Cobb?
I have a bit of a concern here. By going and just fitting dollars in here, once you get past the top 1 or 2 scores in that year, score means nothing. And so you may have a project down at the very bottom and scored 30 points, but if their PE number fits in the dollar amount available, then you fund their PE, and by funding their PE, you're going to have to fund the construction project. And so this, in my humble opinion, bastardizes the scoring system that we've set up to try to pick our best projects. And so I think there's two competing interests here in how to do this. The other question I have that I haven't heard a discussion about is I know of at least one project sponsor with 2 projects that has been given federal aid money in the right of way. And how are we going to fund their construction? This scoring system doesn't take that into account. Now, we're not going to have money for another year or 2 here, so maybe my discussion point is a year early, but we have no money in 22, so after we decide this, it's the next subject up. So you have to give project sponsors money to go on to construction when they're ready to go to construction and they have presented their projects to you. And I haven't heard a discussion about that. It was touched on a little bit in Michigan City, but here we have a real example where we do have project sponsors that are coming in with federal money being spent before, I believe, in the right-of-way phase. So first things first is, what about this issue of a low-scoring project just because the PE amount can fit into the category?
And I'll piggyback onto that and ask, because that's my concern too, is because correct me if I'm wrong, like Dean Hammond has a project on Kennedy Avenue for $3.2 million. That if we fund this, that 1.25, if we funding available in 2023, you're going to have to subtract that off, and now we may not be able to do a project that scored 85 on this. And I had an issue with that when we did all the scoring and the projects. That higher value project now will not get funded, but we scored somebody down in the 30s or 40s.
In the back.
I'll also point out that under quality of life projects, my right-of-way phase requested is certainly fundable in the amount of dollars that you placed in that category.
I'll say one comment about that, and I agree, Denny, there should have been some allowance for previously funded projects because we have a commitment to finish those projects, we understand that. And we had some dialogue, I believe it came up at times, but again, through all of the other committees, this never was a priority to apply points towards. And so that would have been the avenue to get this done, and it just didn't come out in that final wash.
You cannot deny a project sponsor.
We're not denying
It's a
that.
project.
I mean, they'll get funded, but it's just unfortunately the way the process we have laid out now, ranking comes higher than that category, or at least that consideration. And I agree, that should be addressed in our next go-around.
No,
A lot
I
more
think
serious.
that if the project sponsor presents it in this NOFA, I don't see how you can not fund them. They're under
Well,
mandate.
again,
If
two
they don't-
considerations, if we have the money, right, but number two, again, then what is the timetable? If we fund the engineering, how many?
10 years.
10 years. So it's 10 years. It's not like we are committed to fund them the very next year or the next year after, Betty. We have a 10-year commitment, and that's something, again, this group and all the other topical committees are gonna have to address at their comfort level. I mean, how much weight do you give previously funded projects at whatever level, PE, right away, and then going forward, how much weight do you give them to make them complete? That's a big question. We understand that. But right now, it wasn't in our rankings. It just didn't come up.
Let me try this. Go ahead.
Maybe I misunderstood Denny's point, but I think what he's saying is by funding PE for Glendale and Roosevelt at $96,000, you're committed to paying for their construction ahead of construction for higher ranked projects in that same category.
That's what I heard, that's why I think we should pull it from there. And then just, if we have the option of raising the amount that's available for change orders, that's a local decision, it's not hard and fast, there's not any algorithm that you use, is that correct?
It's a historical average of what we've experienced.
It still has to qualify, but you're right.
Yeah, I would prefer not to put it in there for the reasons that Dennis gave. I think those are compelling, because that was part of our discussion when we were doing group two, and at least we preserved the option for that. And the practitioners that have informed me, they know that these things can be volatile. So you never know if you have enough. It's, a little bit of art, a little bit of science, and a lot of art.
Yeah.
I guess I'm gonna ask my question, if this is trickling down, why are we stuck right here? Why do we not just jump back to the top? And I'll be selfish here, and I have my project, can I do my PE right away in 2021 and then do the construction in 2024? I mean,
Yes, patience, Grasshopper. I think that
Where are
might be.
well, because my points are 75, and we're gonna fund some project down here with a 30 or 40.
Well, that's why we need to flesh this out. We're doing this interactively for that reason. I mean, we're trying to get guidance from this TPC as well. That's why we didn't want to sit here and just, here's the draft program and just, what do you think? We didn't want to get into that because of these very issues.
We have one.
Yeah, we have a staff one, but we're not married to it by any stretch because we understand people are going to have issues. Why fund something that's low ranked over? We get this. We get this.
I need clarification. I only drive cars, and hope that you guys build roads where I want them. But, so, what I think I've heard is the 98,000 that's quote left over, not assigned anywhere, could be given to the Valpo project because their PE is 96,000.
Yep.
Because it fits in that category, but yet, based on how you first explained during the programmatic approach aspect, if you didn't assign it to that low-scoring Valpo project, that figure would go back up to the top.
All the way to the top of the most important
And go
program.
to a higher point. Okay, that's what I thought you were saying, and that makes sense.
Yeah, we could do that too, which would pay for the PE on the Westchester Liberty Phase 3. If that's what folks are interested in.
How hard and fast are the categorizations that you've given us?
They address the long-range plan, the critical paths, so that we build the linkages and make
But there's no barrier to using the money that's been identified for this, for that purpose, correct?
We've just put out the raw rankings for your consideration. That's about as far as it's gone.
Would the practitioners object if that money then got placed back at the top for the Westchester Liberty?
So, if I may, Mr. Chairman, so it penalizes me for not asking for PE for my project. I support what Mr. Griffin said about withdrawing the support for, because had I asked for PE, then I would have had my project funded, a project funded. that scored higher, so that now this committee is committed to, or NERC's committed to funding my project in the future. I don't think it's fair to fund PE without programming when construction.
I think you're correct. That's what we're having this discussion.
But do you receive additional points for not funding your PE?
We do. No, we do, but had I asked for PE and I scored higher than the Valparaiso points, I would have taken them up.
I'll just say from the staff's perspective, I mean, I've worked in a previous organization where PE right away was not allowed to be capitalized. You couldn't use federal funds. And programming a TIP was far easier, so much easier, because you only have to concern yourself with construction funds when the project is estimated to be ready. But we want to, in the interest of communities that don't have a lot of resources, requiring them to have all the funding available to do the design and the right-of-way acquisition would bar them from the federal aid process. So we make the option available to have those funds at a cap of 7.5% of the total project cost. But Dean's point is absolutely valid. There's no great way to do this, other than, quite frankly, black and white.
How does the group feel about Mr. Griffith's recommendation? Move it back to the top.
Well, we should go back to the top, but I'm concerned about that it commits us long-term, and I don't, have we identified funding for that long-term?
In 2024, there's a target of 1.8 million for multi-age trails, and that's the top score.
So they would be fundable, and they would be the highest ranking in that group, so that's not as much of a long-term risk to give them as to do this.
Correct. True.
And I thought you argued from funding. It isn't syllogistically consistent, because you did get the extra points for not getting for it, and you're arguing from a standpoint of what if. I don't think that, it would be if you came here with that in the same station, that argument would be actually syllogistically. Thank you, though. I think you're compelling argument. It's great for yourself.
A question for you, I mean, the points that you got for not asking for PE versus the points you get for, would it have moved you up past Mark's?
It would have dropped them.
Yeah, would it have dropped you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, whatever.
Okay.
I don't think they deduct for not doing PE. They don't deduct if you ask for PE. They just give you an enhanced point if you don't.
Well, so we have more of a match.
Right.
Our match is higher, that's why we get higher points.
So
he's still out.
On the strength of all that, and the fact that we don't believe we're making a commitment that will be unfundable, and it is the top one in that category, and I don't see any problem with moving to fund in the multi-use paths is requested PE of 84,375.
In the back. Yes, sir.
We were talking about congestion relief and intersection safety improvement project. And the way I read these spreadsheets, that was HSIP and CMAQ funds. Now, if we move this back up to the top for multi-use trails, that's SPPG funds. Now, are we starting to commingle those funds?
We have the ability to do so. We try to use the targets that INDOT provides us, but in the recent meeting, they were more than insistent we have the flexibility to mix and move the money around. It's not an ideal way to program your TIP. You should use the fundings that have been made available to you, but INDOT says they can handle it on the back end of their programming process.
Well, it's not to say that you can't, after we decide what these programs are, you can't fund the program with the funding of it.
Right.
So you could use STBG money here and HSIP money elsewhere.
Yep.
And still try to fit it.
As long as the overall highway program doesn't exceed your annual allocation of funding.
This is for the time being, this first 5 line. So is that up to a vote, or?
I move, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Do I have a second? Second. Thank you. Any other discussion? All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anybody against?
Thank you.
So let's move on.
All right, as discussed, there's very little money available in 2022. It is also somewhat dependent on whether or not how Charles resolves the deficit in that year with the LPAs that have currently programmed projects.
Right.
So we'd like to hedge our bets and just kind of work with the CMAQ of funding that's available in that year. And that would be effectively funding the air quality public education program that has been a program of NERC's for quite a bit of time.
Any comments?
We had initially put the NOFA out with an assumption that $10 million of projects in 2022 would have to move, but that has not been agreed to, so we should be careful about what we agree to program in that year.
Because we currently have that $7.5 million deficit.
Yeah.
So that's why we would not program any roadway improvements or anything in that.
At this point.
At this point.
Yeah.
Why isn't the full 494?
Because the program target was only 360,000.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. All right, 2023. There's nothing targeted in multi-use trails. And then coming back down to air quality public education again, there is a target for the year? Yes, it was only 360,000 for the entire program. And then moving on to complete streets, there was no target. Expansion services handled on the okay, stormwater, there is no funding available. All right, so here's a topic for discussion. Quality of place, Schererville, 750,000 targeted within that year. As staff, we do recognize there are legacy projects in the region that have been given, that have started, and we do feel logically should be completed. We kind of would like to recommend funding the PE, and then we would have to tie ourselves to funding this project in the next NOFA. And then this would be entered as a capacity expanding project in the 2050 plan. So we would look to fund this in the next NOFA.
Can that be phased, that project?
It would depend on we anticipate funding in the 2025 and 2026 to be a full allocation. Because we will not have done what we've done in the past where we've let projects slip forward. So we should theoretically be able to fund this at the full ask in 2025.
But not until 2025. The earliest.
So you're giving a PE here in 2023. Okay.
We've got two major legacy projects in the region that have had their design, either construction already underway for different phases. This is one of them, or design that is underway. Well, Chicago is fully funded within the existing program. So it's Schererville, it's Porter County, Willow Creek Extension, and this project. And understanding that this may not be the highest ranking program or the highest ranking project, I feel as though as staff, we'd like to recommend completing the work on these projects.
Can I ask a question regarding why, if that's the thought process, why didn't we fund it in 2021 and that would eliminate some of those lower scoring projects down there?
It would, sure, but Jeff, do you need 4 years design?
The out years work better for our schedule and the other projects.
Perfect.
So you have anything to say on those?
Thanks, John.
Because in 2019, the PE is funded for Porter County Willow Creek Extension.
Right.
Yes, Kat.
So the 750,000 figures in those 4 years, 344.4 will go to Cheryl later, but you're suggesting, staff is suggesting that the $750 per year would be used to assist in funding projects underway.
Just for this program in 2023, we're only suggesting the $334,000 go to the PE and right-of-way request for Cherville,
Right.
and the rest of the money would move to the next program. And then in the following year, the same thing would happen until we have a full slug of funding available in 2025.
Okay.
Do you need a motion for that? Or do you-
Oh, well, we just put it in here, but just.
I have a question on the air quality. You indicated that 360,000 was targeted. That was targeted for 2023. It looks like for 2022 it was targeted for 1.45 million.
That's correct, but we do have an enormous deficit in that year, which still needs to be resolved. And so at this point, we don't feel comfortable recommending programming any new projects in that year, except for the air quality public education program.
Staff is working on it, but the fiscal constraints will overwhelm the fund. Okay, back to,
So you can put, yeah, 344 in there.
And on that note too, as staff, we do recognize that these large projects are Ohio Street in Michigan City, or some of these larger projects that come up in Group 1 and 2. We need a better strategy on how to fund them. They're very expensive. They place a lot of weight on our program. They also provide a lot of risk for our program. We're all familiar with the Munster Main Street project. We do expect it to let this week, right?
I did say extra Hail Marys at church on yesterday or Sunday.
But last year,
Within the state too.
and within the state's program, because they're leveraging a lot of NDOT resources for that project. So it's just something we're gonna have to come up with a better strategy. Charles is gonna work on that over the coming year to entertain a process to think about some of these more transformative investments that cost a lot of money and, but bring a lot of resources into the region and make major improvements.
Mark, were you gonna make a motion on behalf of Cherville?
I can.
Thank you. Since you made the motion,
Second.
can I have a second? Thank you. All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anybody against? Hearing none.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to go back. Did we settle the matter of the air quality educational fees?
I believe so. It's just-
I heard a recommendation. Did we embrace that recommendation for the air quality? That would just continue to be funded for your, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And really, there's a bigger problem still.
Yeah, there is. Deb?
I'm not seeing, when I go back to what's been programmed already for 2022, I'm not seeing that we're over-programmed there. So-
It's on the list Charles previously presented. This is only new projects.
Right, but that's exactly what I'm looking at, what Charles presented here, and in 2022, I'm not seeing over-programming. I'm seeing over-programming in 2020 and 2021, and then no over-programming beyond that, so.
I'm sorry, I'm not following. In 2022, there is,
I'm not seeing a number there.
at the very bottom of the program,
For air quality, right?
It talks
So
about.
it's not for air quality then, that we're,
the previous TIP didn't have this programming structure. The programs didn't exist. Charles just tried to emulate that list of projects like we're talking about today to bring.
so it's the bottom line number that's the over-programming, not the category.
Right, unfortunately.
I have a question on the quality, Chairman. So, for 2022, what we're stating is that we're funding the 494,000. 360.
That's what's it is.
No, I'm talking about 2023.
Yeah,
We don't have.
just 360.
Oh, so it's just 360. So am I reading this? I mean, this is 2023, 360. Oh, okay, is that what she was talking about then?
Yes.
Okay.
You don't have the numbers in front of you.
Got it.
Yeah.
All right, so in 2023, we have $1.9 million available in the roadway improvements section.
I can get my project on then.
All right, that is the highest scoring project.
Yes, we absolutely.
And then we filter on down to the next project that fits with $1.6 million is the Crown Point Center Ross Roundabout. And that pretty well dries up our pot of funding.
Is that considering any of the engineering on the bottom?
This may not be for here, but this illustrates to me the point that you were raising. It's Trent?
Yeah.
You can call me Michael, I'm only not paying because we probably need to create a category of projects at 5 million and above. Have a scoring metric for that that's unique because of this resource deal. Because in effect, you've got all these other high cost worthy projects that score higher that we can't go to simply because we're trying to find a pairing with the next nearest fundable project. So I have no problem doing that today. But I do think that you really, this illustrates what you were trying to point out before. We really need to find a way to do something.
Well, these projects need to be more important, these, a little bit more affordable.
That may be the right thing.
Question?
I'm sorry.
Quit scrolling down, if you would go back up. I apologize if I'm asking questions that you all understand, but no, not that far up, sorry.
Oh, sorry, sir.
You had that 1.4 that you gave to,
Center Ross roundabout, right?
yes. Why wouldn't you have given the 1.4 to the PE for the 81 points for Campbell and Lincoln?
We're trying to avoid $40 million over the next 10 years.
Phase that project in over two. Like the first phase would be around about at least Campbell. Then we gotta go over the railroad track, so that's gonna be the expensive part of that overall project.
We should have them present this phase now.
Yes.
That's, I agree with you, that's probably what we needed to have shown to us that. But we are only
Well,
seeing how.
I submitted it as a full project,
Yeah,
understanding that
I
it's a
understand.
larger project.
You did what you were told to do, we probably need to develop a different kind of a process to manage that if it's going to be phased. You've been asking for.
The anchor of this project is over $103 million project, or the story is what goes into that, into the south and the north area. It's gonna happen in the next couple of years.
The businesses are going to move into,
Yeah,
they're going to be free for everything.
that's where our transport development is, the dash, and the located there.
That's,
The big project.
yeah, my question would be, well, Kay was saying, why wouldn't we fund the PE for, Portage for their Samuelson Bridge project?
We could do that too. I mean, it's
That's a higher scoring, I think we should stick up with the higher scores as much as you can.
okay.
But it means we're committed then.
Right.
Well, it's important to note
Two
that
point four won't be hard to fund.
Right.
Samuelson Road also has state money that's coming to the project
Also, that's what?
State money.
in 2022, right?
Community crossings.
2023.
No?
That good, better,
Is that good or bad? Right.
Oh, it's good. They're bringing money into the region from the state, but the thing is we don't have money to match their project, their money.
That's not reflected in that 701,000 or the 2.4? There's more money that is needed. I'm getting lost. You had me found for a while.
Sorry,
now.
Samuelson Road has INDOT money associated with it
Okay,
in 2023.
okay.
So optimally, we would be able to fund the portion, which is $2.5 million, with our funds to leverage the INDOT funds as well as CSX funds, but we only have 1.4 available. And they need 700,000 for right-of-way, as well as 2.5 million for the, or 2.5 construction.
So it's a timing aspect.
Yeah.
So they need to do the 701 work first before they can get the NDOT money.
Yep, you got it designed. And that 701 is reflected the entire project cost. That's why it's not 7.5%. I know you
Yeah.
marked it.
So does that need to be tied to that fiscal year then, or?
Then we're,
If the roundabout at Marcella is first, if we were willing to take half of the federal request, it would be approximately that 1.4 million. But it would be a higher score than the 57 roundabout at Crown Point.
We have the information in front of us as staff for what was applied for. If you can make that commitment right now, the TPC can consider that. If you're empowered to make a commitment on behalf of your city to throw $1.5 million local funds in.
If your letter said, for example, from your private contribution, they're gonna pay half, this would be a real easy choice for us to do.
I
I mean, you can't. But that's, it illustrates that.
Private developer,
But are you pledging today, can you represent the city and say you only need half?
I could put a call in my mayor.
Please. I'll tell you what, if he says yes, I'll make the motion. I can't tell you what the vote will be, but I'll tell you.
We don't get to illustrate. No. Here's the limit.
You didn't allow a, commitment letter to the private business, why is this any different?
We're not allowing the letter. She's representing that she's in a position to make a change today in terms of what she's asking for. Even without the letter, she's a higher scoring project.
I think the matter really comes down, I agree with you, sir. I think the issue that I was trying to raise is that for the purposes of scoring the project, the letter doesn't apply. I mean, that's all it was. She was arguing for additional points to move up on, and we cut off in talking with committees. We said you needed to submit your information at a particular time, and if you didn't submit it on time, we have to move on. And that was the point. So I think this is a totally separate issue. Her asking her responsible fiscal person is a different issue.
If the mayor comes forward, you'll respect.
Yeah, this would, in essence, Chairman, what it does, it changes the request amount so that she can receive that funding, but she's committing other dollars to get to that. That's exactly goal.
While she's doing that, let's revisit the Crown Point. For failure of that, how do people feel about the Crown Point complex?
We're not gonna do this seven, I guess, thought we were gonna do the 710, 701,000 for 40 first. Get that.
That's what we're waiting for.
It's a fun puzzle making experience, isn't it?
Is this roadway improvement you're talking about?
Yes.
Cedar Lake was a construction funding project. It's and roads and so they're actually going to construct something before Cedar. I think that's
Portage, right? That's when that project is funded through the state.
Yes.
Partially funded through the state.
So you're saying the just to be clear, like the 701 that we're talking about now, kind of equals the amount we're getting Portage and done, and then move Gary Cedar Lake to like now, 2023.
Well, so what they're saying is,
Hello?
what they're saying is the state is starting their.
Good, how are you doing?
The state is funding the project in 23, so that piece
Okay.
has to be funded prior to 23.
I'm sorry, they're negotiating.
Yes, I'll speak for the Samuelson Road Portage project. The state has agreed to provide funding for construction in 2023. So the $700,000 for PE would have to come in 2021 or 2022 to be prepared to utilize state funds in 2023 for construction.
So we're going to see project completion.
Provided the $2.5 million for construction in 2023 as for here.
And we're not giving any additional money in 2022, is that correct?
Not at this point.
Right? And 2021, we've already discussed, correct? No?
But the contention is that this is a higher scoring project than the money we've already given to Gary and Cedar Lake.
And so,
But what he's saying though, if you're unable to fund that $2 million for the remainder of the project in 2023, then it doesn't move forward, right?
Correct. There is, PE that is needed to fund the construction of that project in 2023.
But if they don't get that 2.4 in 2023, that goes to that there.
That's correct.
That's the discussion.
The project is not moved forward.
And that's totally dependent on the state, that's 2023.
The state has agreed to provide construction funds contingent upon $2.5 million provided here in 2023 for construction.
and just so we're clear, there isn't $2.4 million for 23. So it would theoretically be a point at this point.
And that's probably why we shouldn't fund the PE.
Yeah. Look at that.
Okay, so that still leaves us 1.6 million, and the conversation has ended with the mayor. The conversation has ended with the mayor. Do you have news to report?
Yes, he indicated that if we could slot into 2023, we will take the 1.4 or whatever that figure is, and we will come up with the rest of it as local funds. Or some combination of local and private.
That's up to you, but it can't come from us at this point.
Pardon?
That's up to you guys, it won't come from us.
I understand.
What do you say is still remaining?
1.6.
1 point what?
6.
Take that.
Is that your request?
So can we motion on that, or is it?
Yeah, there needs to be a motion.
So they're gonna pick up the remaining balance.
That's what we just said.
So, not trying to throw a wrench in the scene, but Colbert, I don't have an issue with getting the money, but what are we allowing, okay, you're gonna pick up all the rest.
Yes.
Is there any of those higher scoring projects that may want that money and they're willing to pick up the rest? So I think that should be asked, and if they say no,
Fair to ask.
it's fair to ask, they may say, yeah, we'll take it.
You're posing the questions asking, anyone here who wants to say that? Please do. But I have to keep my promise, I'm gonna make the motion,
Anybody
as I
else?
said, I would if you got
The city of Belleville is willing to reduce their ask of $14 million down to $3 million. The first phase of that project for around got committed $4.7 million total project.
So is it 3 million?
May I say one thing regarding
Yes.
past practices? It's been common in the past that communities have reduced their request to fit the funding, but never have we changed scope because that changes scores. So if it's a matter of the score staying the same and a lesser amount being taken so that the community overmatches a certain amount of funds, that's been allowed every tip I've been involved in for the last 10, 12 years. So, but not to rescope the project, that would require rescoring all the applications.
Valpo has, I believe, made a similar offer, but for 3 million, but only 1.6 is available.
Right, so we just did PE, start the project, and ask for the following years.
So I went for 1.4.
But you're using it for each
Well, it's for $225,000 roughly.
Just took one phase.
How they score all the points.
So you're proposing to
45 points from the whole project. My question is, Tyler, how are your points, like Jake's saying, if you use your whole project length to get your points?
So it's located one block from our downtown, it's in the urban core, it's connected to our transit services. right on 130.
And that's not a scope change? Of course, you're
Well,
gonna
it's
say
part of the
no.
overall project, I'm just trying to phase that project so that the project can get funded over a number of, whatever. There's no other way they're gonna be able to fund a $22 million project.
So then shouldn't the PE reduce accordingly if we're gonna phase this?
Yeah, that's.
And this is
Right.
logic, you've got a logical term, and I know this, that we've already discussed as well. You can break it up in logical segments.
Right.
Unfortunately, we don't have that information right now with us to make a decision, so.
Well, we're waiting for Hammond anyway, because they're higher scoring than Ralph. anyway.
I am.
No, we have fun with it.
Mr. Chairman, Danny.
Oh, okay.
While we're waiting for Hammond, on the
Speak up,
subject.
Dennis.
While we're waiting for Hammond, on the previous subject, I checked, and the environmental client says it's between 2006 and 2007, so we're past the 10-year window already. Mitch asked me what we would have to do, probably we would have to when we go to letting, we would probably do an AI to update that, but we're already up past the 10-year window on these two projects.
Which two projects?
Say, which two projects?
Lake County Trail projects.
The Veterans Trail Project and our multi-use trails. There's two of them.
And that plays into what? How does that play into the waiting game with Valpo and Hammond?
No matter what my money put on.
Yeah,
It doesn't, thank you. That's
he's trying to prioritize it because of the previous application. That there's existing money in there for environmental work and right-of-way work, and it could expire. The PE could, the environmental could expire.
Yeah.
Gilbert's lower. And Hammond. And Hammond's going to see if it's going to project. Right.
We could push this all the way back to the top too.
Well, yeah, we can keep coming back, yeah.
Fund my project in 2023.
But you're okay.
Yeah.
How close are we to the end of this?
If this decision, if we can spend the 1.6 million, we go to 2024. And then we've got to do transit. We might want to get lunch.
Which project was Hammond negotiating?
I think it's Kennedy Avenue, we forgot to ask, but it's the same size.
Yeah, it sounded like that's the one.
Okay, so there would be no scoping changes in that if they come up with a 50-50 match type of thing.
We can confirm.
That's only construction dollars.
I had a general question while we wait. Do projects that require PE and construction both and are being requested, do those score less than ready, like a construction ready project? Okay. You did, you went.
No, sorry, yes. The answer is yes, especially for anyone on the camera. I'm sorry.
Okay then, no answer. I'm gonna go ahead and keep my commitment to you. I'm gonna make commit my promise to, the balance of our dollars. I move that we grant 1.6 million, whatever the number was, please, as being the commitment to the roadway improvement project for Holders, Marcel and 61st. And that be confined to our commitment.
Second.
You understand they're going to come up with the balance.
Yeah, you've got to come up with a balance somehow.
Right.
Without scoping the project down.
Without, yeah, exactly.
Without scoping the project.
And I'm saying that in my motion, without scoping the project.
We're not scoping it, we either build
I understand, but we want to make sure in the record you've got it. Because this will probably be precedential.
Now that we got a second.
We're looking at the record that says the mayor indicated yes.
Okay. Do we have a second?
Mark gave a second.
Second, with Mr. Griffin's.
Any other discussion?
I would just say, I'm sorry, I have to vote because of the time pressure. And
That's fine.
I'll be voting.
As you should.
So, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And you say no. Anybody else no? Okay.
But here's the deal, now that we know that this can happen, probably everybody should come prepared with some non-scope limit and reduction.
All right.
Let's move on.
So the top of 2024, multi-use paths is game. So we have Chesterton, Westchester, Liberty Phase 3. We've already funded the PE right away as the top scoring project. And so let's try to see what that does. Looks perfect. Woohoo. All right, $675,000 is left over. Anyone want to phase their project, overmatch? Or do you want to move the money down to the next program? Please say yes.
Yeah, Dean, can you phase your project and fund it? Can you phase or fund your project for the trail?
We're at 2024, multi-use trail.
Just 600 and something.
Dennis, no, I don't think so. Can you?
It's gonna either end at Gary or it'll end midway to Gary. So yeah, you could build the trail halfway into Shirley Hines if you wanted to.
Well, no, but I thought you were going to do the math. They can't change the scope. They have to pick up the other half. Okay. Move it down.
All right, let's just move it down and keep moving.
I agree with that.
All right, air quality. So fund the air quality education at its target. Now we get to have some fun with some diesel replacements. All right, we have 1.765 million. Charles, you already have Lake Station in which year of the TIP?
2021.
Okay, so Charles requested that they reprogram or re-request the funds because they changed something about the project?
This was originally a P3 project, and they have $600,000 in there. And that has kind of fallen through. They are asking to rescope it. And as a CNG station for one project, and two, another project would be to fund the conversion of the refuse trucks to CNG.
So with that said, the 2021 project is already in the TIP.
For $600,000, we would free up some money in 2021 by doing one or the other.
So that being said,
We would get a bigger bang with diesel replacement than CNG station.
What does Lake Station want to do?
Transform their diesel refuse trucks.
Which project?
What's that?
Which project?
160.
Which project do they want to choose?
Oh. Well, Hobart has a CNG station less than 4 miles away.
So it's staff's recommendation that we fund the not the station, but the other one.
To fund the
With
trucks.
it- with
On the trucks.
I'm not sure on the project description.
Well, I suggest we just go with staff recommendation for lack of the representative from Lake Station.
Yeah, I think they would rather have the trucks than the station if that's not gonna be happening.
Absolutely, that's what staff's recommending.
Yep, that's cool.
All right, so then back to 2024, we have 4 air quality projects. Top scoring is Hobart's replace 3 diesel. And then we move down, and then we have a mostly fully programmed set of projects from the environmental program. So kudos to the environmental program. All right, down to complete streets. We have $751,000 available. The Gary On-Road Trail, Fifth Avenue is a $4 million project. Don't have the funds available. I wouldn't recommend funding the PE on that, considering it's outside the window of the TIP. So I would move on down to the sidewalk improvements in Maryville. If we do a 50-50 split.
I'm probably the one person in the room that's uniquely in a position to know if we could or not, but I can't tell them that.
$131,000 available. That's what I'm just confirming. That's what we want to do.
So you want to take that? Or just want to go about?
Superintendent. See, he's gonna be mad because I know where there's money. I'm gonna go to heaven when I'm done, so I've actually been living within my honorable salary, and so I could not do that. Thank you. There's that too. Sorry.
So where are we at?
I'm gonna try to get a hold of the superintendent, because I know where there's money.
Well, we're still doing something else.
Whether or not we want to move the 131 to the next program or leave it here.
That's the issue, right?
Now it seems like chump change, but it starts to add up.
Trying to adjust. We never set a maximum amount just for this notebook for a project cost. That would be something that we could add for the next round. Because we typically get like 30 million, 20 million, sorry, a year. Give somebody 15 million, there's not a flat.
Okay.
That's part of the problem.
Okay. All right, so the next program is environment. There's a target of 334,000. Valparaiso has the highest scoring project.
Yes, it is.
Oh, yeah. I know.
All right, 1 second.
Kyle agrees to reduce its request to the balance left, please.
All right.
If there's still there. And he said, I have that much money, really?
Now there goes the secret, Mike.
He needs to know what the cash balance is relative to the appropriation. So what will that final number be, please?
Oops, 131, number 3.
It's on the board.
333.
Thank you. And I thank the members of the TDC.
All right, so back down to environment.
So the Belton project would be 301
All right, so there's a $54,000 balance. Hammond, you're already matching 50-50 on this project. Do you really want to bring the cost all the way down to
What are we going?
the environment, stormwater improvements in Nevada Street?
So the whole has been funded?
Yes.
Yes.
At 301, right?
Yep. All right, so we already took care of Kennedy Avenue for the time being with their PE. We moved that 750,000 forward. In 2024, we have a balance of 3.85 million.
Yeah, down at the bottom.
Willow Creek is going to be funded in the next tip.
The next
that we don't have enough.
Okay. I thought they were phasing, I thought,
the PE was already covered in.
yeah. 20.
but they got right away.
Oh.
What's the balance?
Chris Murphy said that they were phasing, we had multiple phases.
Yeah, and this is only phase one.
The 4 million is
One second.
phase one.
3.5 million.
That's good.
I mean, so next in line would be Cameron?
Summer Street, which is fine. Too
No,
much.
Cameron seems to be a fool.
Kennedy Avenue.
We can do that.
And then we have 306,000 left over.
So the proposal is to do Kennedy Avenue.
Yes.
At what year?
2024.
No, I know this chart is
That's 336, the same,
Say again?
Jameson Road, 40.
The PE?
No, construction.
Oh. Okay.
Are we still at roadway improvement?
Yeah.
Where 300,000 is fund?
So is that,
Samuelson's, or Portage is requesting 336 for
Yeah. I thought there was state money coming in 23.
I'm assuming they're gonna have to move it.
I'll have to work on that.
I was gonna say, wait a minute. I thought it was pretty much based on the timetables and the representation, we didn't think we'd be in a position to do anything. There would be news.
I'll work on state match money and make up the difference in 2024.
But, so PE would still have to get funded, because I don't think we funded PE even for this
It
project.
did not, the city will have to take up the
So you would take up the PE and you would take the 306 and you'd find the money elsewhere.
correct.
So you still have 2.1 million.
2.8.
well, that's
It's already
included, they were
funded.
percent right away.
Oh.
And we have $600,000 from the railroad, and the balance will come from the state.
Unfortunately, we really don't know the specifics of your relationship.
I
take your word for it.
I know it's funded, is available, but, it's a substantially funded project that's closing the gap.
So pretty
The
much
state,
that closes
the
the
state
gap.
had agreed, if they would cover 40%, if NERC would cover 40%, and then the city would pick up the other 20%. And then the CSX money is icing or candy on it.
Right, so we know that 40% is not happening, because there's no funding for that, right?
As we've
Because
displayed.
40% would be the 2,458,000. That's what change.
And we're giving it to you in the programming year after you need the money. I thought you needed it in 2023.
But it's not available in 2023, so we'll move it to 2024.
So he'll get the state to give them the money until the 24th. So again, just to clarify, 306 is going, you're requesting that goes to you. You pick up the PE, and the remaining balance of that will stay, whatever funding mechanism you can come up with, will pay the remaining.
Correct.
I'll motion that.
I'll second.
Any other discussion?
That's remarkable adoption.
Yeah.
All right, that brings us to, oh wait, do it,
Yes. Take a vote, if there's no other discussion. All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anybody against? Okay, where are we at now?
that closes Group 1 Highway, thank you.
Thank you.
Now we can do transit.
Thank everyone for being willing to discount, in some cases for marketing themselves.
And remember, it's your commitment, not ours.
All right.
We have one more group to go through.
Oh, no, everyone's leaving.
What's left?
I have transit. So to preface this briefly, there's a $10 million.
We're still trying to hold a meeting, so if you can keep it a little quieter, take it out in the hallway. Thank you. Sir.
So there's a $10 million deficit of 5307 fund requested. So we need to cut $10 million from 5307 funded projects. There are 4 funding sources for FTA in Group 1. There's 5307, which is like the equivalent of STBG. It's the most flexible and broadly applied. It also can be used to subsidize operations funding. Then there is 5310, which supports mobility services for individuals with disabilities, seniors, etc. And then there is 5337, which is solely designated for NICTE's use, for state of good repair projects for the upkeep of the South Shore Line. And then there's 5339 funding, which is for use by GPTC or East Chicago Transit as fixed route transit operators for state of good repair projects. So last week during the Transit Operators Roundtable, this deficit was demonstrated to the operators. There was one option proposed on how to address that problem. What I'll show you first is the full program of applied projects. So this, if you thought it was hard on the highway side, welcome to the transit world. There is 260 rows of data to consider, and 4 funding sources in 5 years, so this is really hard. But if we were to fully fund every project as requested by the transit operators, this is where the $10 million deficit in 2024, where I'm kind of shaking the mouse. So we need to bring that down. Now, FHW and FTA only regard the first 4 years of the TIP as something in which they review and approve. The 5th year, in their eyes, is considered informational. So we are only responsible for fixing the problem through 2023. It would be very ideal to get the problem solved all the way through the entire program, but it's 1 o'clock and we're all hungry, so we'll see what happens. All right.
Let me ask you this, are you asking that we spread the $10 million deficit across 4 years rather than 5?
Or some projects have to come out. I mean, there's at least in 2023, we need to make that $5 million deficit in 5307 disappear. Okay. So, yes.
And transit didn't solve this.
Well, they were presented one option by staff on how to do this.
Okay.
I don't think that everyone feels like it's a very good option. And so what that option was is there's a line item of projects called preventative maintenance projects. It's like state of good repair projects on the highway side, doing your asphalt treatment early before you have to do a full reconstruction. You do the tinkering on buses and the maintenance facilities and everything as time goes along to maintain your fleets, etc. That funding source, or those project line items were proportionally cut by everyone. So everyone took a proportional cut. This solved the problem through the 5 years of the program, but only the first 2 years of the TIP had fully funded projects. And so I think this left a lot of angst with the transit operators. It's not a very good, it's an option. It's probably not the best one. So that, yeah, I can show you that one here.
Is that the asset management one?
Yes, asset management.
Asset management?
Yep.
So NICD and GPTC have like 9 million.
In projects every year, yeah.
Preventative maintenance.
Yep.
Okay.
All right, so that's what this looks like. We did solve the deficit, but we took a lot of money out of 2022, 2023, and 2024 projects. And not a lot of rationale or ability to actually move their programs forward with this solution. It does only achieves fiscal constraint that's about it. One additional option that was presented with short notice yesterday, I will certainly admit to that, was controlling cost growth within the operating line items and the preventative maintenance line items. There is an assumption of growth within each of those line items through the 5-year program at about 5% per year by the transit operators. So this is where things start to get fun because, again, just like on the highway side where we assume no revenue growth because we have the FAST Act is expiring in 2020 and our Congress has not always treated transit with the nicest, they haven't always loved transit operators like we do in the region. So without any better indication of what's going to happen on the funding side, we recommended that as staff that the funding amounts lay flat for the program. So when you control for cost growth in operations and preventative maintenance, we were able to solve the deficit through 2022 by fully funding every project except for that changing the assumption of 5% growth to 3% growth. It still leaves a deficit in 2023 of $4 million that we'd have to solve. And then in 2024, there's a $7.7 million deficit, which we technically don't have to address today. Now, there are some things that might occur over the coming years. We could have revenue increases because each transportation authorization has increased transportation funding. But the Highway Trust Fund is funded by, and the Mass Transit Fund are funded by the gas tax, and the purchasing power of the gas tax fund in 1993 continued to weaken. In 2009, the Highway Trust Fund and the Mass Transit Fund started getting general revenue infusions to make the Highway Trust Fund solvent. The FAST Act prepaid all of those infusions so that the entire life of the FAST Act had that money made available. However, absent of a gas tax, the next transportation authorization bill will once again face this issue where we have to contend with general revenue going into the transportation world. So if the FAST Act does, or with the new authorization, if increased funds come along, that'll solve some of the out-year problems. Another thing is that we have to negotiate a split of funding with the entire Chicago urbanized area for Group 1 funds. So we compete with the CTA, Metra, and PACE for funding. And so we will be able to renegotiate that split of funding in 2021. So there might be more funding coming through that negotiation, as well as there has been more transit operated within the region, so that should demonstrate more ridership and generate more 5307 for the region alone. So that's just a caveat on some of the things that make me feel more comfortable leaving 2024 in deficit, because there's so many known unknowns, or I'm not sure which unknowns.
Maybe we'll deal with what we can deal with, what we should. So 2020 through 2022, you're recommending flatlining
for revenue.
Which, as painful as that is, that sounds like the most viable option.
Yeah. So there's one more option, I apologize, that was brought up this morning. And this, instead of controlling, it just zeroes out any growth in the program altogether. So that on the operations side and the preventive maintenance side, no growth occurs. And with that, we only have a $1.5 million deficit in 2023.
Is that realistic though?
Well, yes and no. One of the issues with transit funding is sometimes we don't know what we're going to get in terms of an apportionment until the fiscal year that we're operating in. So the real numbers that we do when it comes to putting together our grants, sometimes, for instance, the federal fiscal year, is that October to September?
Yes.
Yeah, correct. Sometimes we don't get the fiscal year's apportionment, quote unquote, until 4 or 5 months into that fiscal year. And that allows us, okay, we know what we're getting as a region, so we will make an adjustment to our preventive maintenance and operations program based on that. Or we will remove a bus or push a bus back so that we can continue to actually operate. Sometimes it's horse trading within an individual agency. So the flatlining option is for the TIP purposes to make sure that the TIP itself is fiscally constrained. Knowing that on October 1 of each fiscal year, that's when we'll get the actual numbers that we have to operate with. And we will often, and sometimes discuss with CPDC, NERC, and NICSE, make an adjustment based on that, because those are the 3 grantees that get federal funds directly. So even though we need flatlining, we would be flatlining and programming only. And what that does is it really lowers what we're talking about in terms of what we need to do to get home.
But it keeps us within a constrained offering that we can guarantee.
Right, right. And apologies for having a sidebar earlier. What I was trying to do is reduce the amount of time that we spend here about the transit program by seeing what the transit operators thought when it comes to that. There are a couple of caveats that have come up. There are a couple of projects that were omitted that we want to reinstate. But some of the things we're going to be doing don't mess with the bottom line that Trey talked about. So the effective numbers are deficits in 2023 and 2024. And I'm kind of confident that we can make some adjustments that can alleviate that.
What's your suggestion for 2023?
So for 2023, one of the reasons why we lowered that deficit is moving several of our vehicle replacements to 2024 to lower that deficit just a little bit. My thinking is by the time we get to actual fiscal year 2024, there's going to be at least one number between now and then, and we'll have some other options to affect that vehicle replacement. Our vehicles and East Chicago's vehicles and the Chicago gas vehicles are rather expensive. So what we'd like to do is officially at this time move some vehicles to 2024. Am I thinking to reduce that? This is something we haven't seen trade, to reduce that deficit in 2023, assuming that we're comfortable with the flatlining option.
When you say flatlining, we're talking about flatlining revenue?
And
cost growth.
Operation. We all made pretty much 5% increases in.
I thought the revenue was flatlined, and I thought I heard you say you went with a different assumption of 2%.
Originally we did, but what we're
That was
talking
another
about
option.
now, what we're talking about now is not having an increase in cost per fiscal year. Knowing that if we do get an apportionment that's higher than what the 2020 amount, we will be bringing that up because we'll have more money coming in. That's what happens often. If it comes down or below what we're talking about, then we'll have to make some hard choices. But we've been making those hard choices in the fall of every single year we've been in existence. Okay. So what I'd like to do, Trey, is take that last vehicle that's in 2023 and move that to 2024, which pretty much takes a third of that 2023 deficit off of this right there.
Did I get the right vehicles, by the way?
I'm not sure, all the numbers, but yeah, we originally had 6 vehicles in 2023 and 6 vehicles in 2024. We want to move all of those into 2024, basically because that's the 1 year that's unconstrained. In between now and then, you're going to look at options. I mean, it could be CMAC, it could be, yeah, right. I mean, you can go there. Yeah. So we have options between now and then, because those are the buses we purchased in 2010, I think, that took the property in 2010. So they won't come due until 2012 early. But that affects that 2023 deficit.
Totally, or
That brings it to 1.3.
the deficit is 1.3?
Now with that option, with his additions or changes, proposed changes, it would bring it to 1.3.
Instead of 10.
Instead of 2. We started with 2.
Do we have any data, I understand trying to predict what the Congress will do, that's already followed. Do we have any data that represents what historically the increases have been every new fiscal year over time that could give us a reasonable algorithm for forecasting? Because flatlining the revenue problem, flatlining your cost of operation might be the thing to do, but flatlining your revenue may not be if you don't think it's reasonable. Because in both cases, you're making your assumptions to sort of make everything work, knowing full well neither of them are true at all. They're not even tied to some reasonable forecast tool. And I'm worried about them having operating reserve as well, and I don't know if that comes out of our money or not, that's the money we're talking about today, but their margins are so, what you're telling me is their margins don't exist with you.
Not with this program, Flex for projects.
I don't know how you guys do it.
I mean, theoretically though, the city that's hosting whatever or organization can find the money else, I mean, if they have other monies in their coffers, they could.
We don't have that option.
Yeah, I don't think they have any reserves in the GPC. I don't think any of them do. So let me ask this, based on historic increases, 0.5%, that was the critical assumption for the 5-year period, just 0.5% revenue, flatlining spending. Would that close off everything?
I'm gonna see my math skills.
Because it still gives you options to delay purchase on assets, moving assets. And literally, I think preventative maintenance, the Air Force does it all the time. That's why B-52s made in the mid-50s are still flying. I mean, I get that. There's a real wisdom.
Just point out, we don't have any mid-50s buses still running.
That's good. But if you did, I'd be impressed. That's right.
What would that do, Trey?
Okay, it doesn't work with 0.5%.
We're just talking about the revenues that we're going to have. You're right, there's other potential sources. We can only commit what we have or what we're given.
Oh my gosh, I'm broken.
You might have the whole thing by 5, yeah, there you go.
Trey, while you're doing that, I think my big concern would be that if that occurs, you had mentioned that we compete with like Chicago metropolitan area, and so by flatlining, not seeing growth in revenue specifically, wouldn't that eliminate our competitiveness with the Chicagoland area? If everyone else is growing, the federal government's going to say, well, sorry, I'm not going to prioritize you and you because in 3 years or 4 years you've shown no growth. We have other programs that have, and so
we are kind of growing. There have been new services put out there. What we don't know is how that's going to impact both the federal funding that we get from Washington and how we split the revenue with the greater Chicago region. Because we could have a 2% increase in route miles, and Chicago has a 5% increase. And that would have an impact on, it would basically eat up our increase. I do know that PACE launched a bus rapid transit line around the same time we launched us. But we also put some service back in Hammond and Highland. So we don't know how it's gonna wash out. So it is all an educated fraction.
But what we're saying today, though, is that we're gonna restrain ourselves from doing anything and just keep it the way it is now so that we can meet this issue. And again, the way that the federal government has funded these type of things is they look at priority, they look at service, they look at growth, they look at all that. And so you, in essence, are, you know, kind of putting yourself in a position where they may say, we're gonna give you the same amount or less because you're not, you know,
The
doing that.
numbers are based not on whether or not we spend a certain amount or program a certain amount now. They're based on, it's based on the limit of Congress. But in the split, it's based on a formula that includes population, ridership, the number of buses we have out there. And we do know that we held off on reducing some service from many of our member agencies, and a couple of member agencies actually increased service. Plus, we're gonna be renegotiating that RTA split, and we're gonna be, you know, cheering on emergency staff and the other grantees and getting a better split with the RTA. But we, at this point, yes, by being conservative with costs, and then maybe 0.5% or 1% on revenue, we put ourselves in that position now, knowing that our real numbers come when we get worse.
So I'll just add quickly, though, that we will have a full program of projects and a demonstrated need for the first time in many years, because we haven't had a NOFA on the transit side, and be able to walk in with that data and evidence to this negotiation. Whereas prior, that we would have this weird cycle of not funding or programming the TIP, and it made it much harder to have a conversation with someone when you're trying to compete for money. And well, what are your needs? How much do you have programmed? Well, we haven't programmed the TIP in a while, so now we're going to have a fully programmed TIP and showing need, because we're seeing now a $4 million deficit on a little spreadsheet. So I think we'll be in a good position to have a stronger conversation with the RTA about our region's needs and what we are due for our 5307 in our region.
That was kind of my thinking, not doing anything about 2024 to show we're straining it out as far as we can. Help us there.
Plus, like I said, by 2024, especially for the larger agencies, GPTC, Chicago, Valparaiso, we'll try to find some way of affecting how we pay for those larger units between now and then.
Without compromising service, you're saying, without
I don't
programming.
We don't have a VW settlement money, there's other stuff out there, Tara.
All right, so I did the math wrong, but it ended up being 3% per year, but I forgot to compound it. But if it's
Off with your head.
if we just went with 3% more than today each fiscal year, we've solved the problem in 2023.
Is that reasonable based on our history?
I think so. I just try to be conservative, because cutting is harder than it is to add.
But I'm willing to do that too, if we have to do that. My point is that when you have a plan, you have to take into account two things as to the forecast. And you're planners, so I want to talk about the finance side. You should first say, I want to be conservative enough that I'll never be underfunded. That's one. Two, not so conservative that I've denied policymakers meaningful data that they could, like I would say, if I'm too conservative, I've denied the policymakers in my community the decision to hire another police officer or not. So I can't, I've got to be reasonable enough to protect the margin, but not so conservative that I know I'm going to be fine, but I've also denied the policymakers information that they could have chosen to do something with. Is 3% reasonable? I don't know. That's why I was saying 0.5% by flatlining the spending, and as long as it didn't affect us, which your question is excellent, which is what was probative value. 0.5% seems a safe assumption, because we know it's increased every time that the new fiscal years happen. Did I understand that correctly? Okay, we just don't know by what amount. So having no increase in there to me is an unreasonable forecast choice. Right. So now the critical assumption is, let's make a forecast choice that's conservative, that allows some growth, because remember there always is some, but will protect balance and be reasonably likely that we'll get, at least.
This is
point of fact, if I remember correctly, guys, and I could be wrong, I think our 2014 or 2015 note was assumed $11.3 million, 5307 program. And if that's the case, then we have pretty much had a close to 3% increase per year since, if we're looking at 12.2 here.
If that's historically been true,
Right. We will be getting into that, but we do have a Swiss government which
Okay, with 1.5% compounding, we make it work.
Okay.
to me, that's a prudent choice. It admits that there's an increase every year. You're not going to the max that your history has provided, but you've got margin to play with, and you say it puts us in balance.
It's still flatlining operations.
Right, that's still, I don't really to do that. Realizing that you're probably gonna operate at higher costs. And you'll be able to change your operational needs if the money comes in higher, correct?
And that's moving your fleet purchase to 2024.
That's correct.
So, that in mind.
Will the operators be okay with that approach?
Are we okay?
Will the transit operators be okay with that approach?
Yes, but representing group 2, you're gonna make that assumption group 1, don't you have to make that assumption group 2?
Okay.
Then do we have to go circle back and do that over again?
Well, your 5307 on operating is the only place you see a deficit, so we can see how the math works out.
What was your assumption for that?
There was 0% growth. But we didn't.
For revenue side.
Yeah.
But there's been growth every year. That's what I'm saying. I think that's a wrong critical assumption for sure.
We can come back.
Did you guys cut a bunch of stuff out, balance or no? Just look at that. So your deficit's outside of this. Fine. It's in the 5th year.
Did you already lose that 2023 vehicle before you make that adjustment? Okay. I'm okay with keeping that. We did talk about that project that was on the list last week, it's off this week. We want to make that adjustment. That was a $720,000 project that was on the list at the Operators Roundtable. It wasn't on the list since last night. We want to have that restored, but in addition to that, we are putting $1 million back on the table. With the way our program is currently, we're going to reduce our operating amount for 2020 by $400,000, for 2021 by $400,000, and 2022 by $400,000.
So each year it's 400, I'm sorry, or?
No, 2020 and 2021 by $400,000 apiece.
Okay.
And 2022 by $200,000.
Okay.
Our theory is, and we can't do that for the out years because by then our CMAQ program is going to be exhausted, and those routes that are being funded through CMAQ will have to go into our operating element. What that will do,
It's free up for that missing project.
right, and what that will do is pays for that missing project, plus Frank's got an issue that I would like to see addressed.
Last week when we went through the chart, there is a vehicle replacement that I had scheduled in 2021, was not put on this list.
Okay, how much is that?
420,000.
That's full cost.
Full cost.
Okay. And that was 2020?
2021.
Okay, we could probably make the math work.
Let the record show that you're in Chicago, just like coordinated.
I'll work it together.
And Claudia, I fixed your computer.
I was gonna say, mine's tiny.
She needed $3,000.
But it's, that's receptive, because it's 5,000. Thank you.
Yep.
Trey, a couple of things. For removing the vehicles for replacement, that's just for GPTC, that's not for the dash, correct?
Right.
Okay. And then I need to look for you guys to make sure there was an issue in the RTIP with regard to the replacement of a dash vehicle. It says vehicle replacement, that's actually an additional dash bus.
Okay.
My understanding, James said there's some additional funding there for the purchasing of the bus.
Right.
So I'm only at this point replacing 3. I just want to make sure that 2022 that we've got funds
available for that work.
Okay.
And also, there's another issue with our BMX project in the Arctic as well, that I think I mentioned to James, and we can work with that. Doesn't affect, this does.
Fran, I have a question on that $5,000, that one. My stuff's always come under 5307, and I see it, you have it listed under 5310 or 53. Yeah, 5310. I've never received 5310 funds before, so how did I get shifted over to that?
It's just a fiscal constraint mechanism.
So there's, as far as my reporting or anything like that?
We can double
there's no
check.
lot of difference.
We'll double check.
Okay.
Basically, I have the same question, Terry, because it's several projects in my which I don't receive those funds.
Okay.
So, we need to look.
Yeah.
And there's even one item as I'm looking all the way across that I see, I think I'm looking here, right, vehicle replacement, there's a drop in receipt.
We'll work with you on that.
2022.
Yep.
So, for revenue, do you do 1.5 or 3%?
1.5.
So we hold fast on cost,
Yes.
1.5 increase in revenue.
Annual contract.
Annual. We fixed Claudia's computer. I don't even know what that means. We added the customer experience project, added East Chicago's bus in 2021. Is there anything I'm missing?
Just need to reconfirm that.
Can you just scroll down here on slowly? Scroll and pause, scroll and pause.
Claudia needed 5,000 for her computers, right?
She said 5,200 instead of 2,200.
Okay. So revenue's been fixed up here. Claudia's computer's been fixed. I haven't added anything in yet and adjusted the operating amounts because there's things that the cells are linked and
I'll send you an email for that.
destruction will occur
But
quickly.
basically, for 2020, Gary's agreed to reduce operating costs by $400K, right, putting back? 2021, $400K, and 2022, $200K.
Right.
Okay? And we're restoring a project that was omitted.
Right, 720,000, and then we're adding East Chicago's bus. What's the federal cost for that? 420 total? 380.
And you want to make sure your Chicago Dash cost is correct. And what program was that, please?
2022.
And you have that bus identified for a cost, I assume, staff?
Well, it shows in the RTIC, there's dash money available for that for a bus, I just need to confirm that.
It's good for 2021 to approve.
And it's a CMAC too, right? Yeah. So that's on Carl's sheet.
Excellent. Did my notes.
Anything else?
Anybody?
One last comment, so it looks like we resolved all of 2023's problems up to that point, but we're still recognizing that there may be a situation in 2024, correct?
There will be a situation in 24.
But FHW and FTA only look at the first 4 years.
No, I get that, I got that, I just want, as much as everyone's cheering right now, that there's still an issue.
So we're gonna be looking at, we're all gonna be looking at options on this bigger meeting.
And frankly, I don't see why they go, and to go to 5 years, you create statistical outliers in any kind of forecast model anyway. It's reasonable, we still do it because it's a planning metric, but I think 3 years is reasonable to plan for anyway. So the 4th year becomes, you start approaching the statistical reliability problem.
Well, you start looking at revenue strength, which we encourage investing, but depending on a lot of entities. So 5 years is really far.
for any business.
I think so.
Point of clarification, the 4 years, 5 years is if you have right of way with the project and you have PE, you start out PE next year, right of way could take up to 2 years or longer, depending on how many parcels you have. So that's why you get into 4 and 5 year projects, taking 4 or 5 years to build a project, depending on its size. I know Lake County had a project that had 99 parcels. Knock one down, you got 98 left to buy. So that's why you get into those 4 and 5 years, and that's why NDOT has asked us to show 5 years on the tip.
Or even longer, because you have to develop personal relationships with all the properties you're purchasing with the people.
Well, they get pretty strict about talking to property owners then. And there are a lot of times when you can have, everybody has the best intentions, but when you show them a check, people change.
Sometimes.
Well, yeah, sometimes they do. Sometimes they say, oh, wow. And then one time that year, it comes in December or January, and you're looking at paying off some bills or something like that, then that could have some effect too.
Well, back to transit, Kate first.
What's our next step that we have to do before people start peeling off here? I mean, I need to.
Need a motion?
I move that we make the adjustments that were
Summarized.
Summarized, like you know.
I'll second that.
Go ahead. Yeah,
So,
you got
for the
a
record,
motion.
has anyone heard from Margot? Is she okay with, she provided any comments or anything in regard to what was proposed? Okay.
Nothing.
Unfortunately, we don't have everyone's.
Or Bruce, even just from Bruce, no?
Okay, if you have a motion on the floor, all those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anybody against? Unanimous. Do we have any other business to come before us?
Just the typical catch-ups on the committees and whatnot.
Make a motion,
I think we could probably read about it on the.
Second.
So look to your webpage for all meeting announcements.
Thank you for your time today.
Let me send an email